Every modern country needs one thing to keep its economy running: oil. Countries like India, China, and Japan import millions of barrels every single day. But there's a problem. A huge portion of that oil must pass through a tiny waterway called the Strait of Hormuz, located between Iran and Oman. If this narrow passage were ever blocked, even for a short time, oil prices around the world could rise very quickly. So why is this small strait so important? And why does one country have so much influence over it? By the end of this video, you'll understand why this tiny waterway controls so much of the world's energy. On a world map, the Strait of Hormuz looks very small. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, and it sits between Iran in the north and Oman in the south. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 39 kilometers wide. That may sound wide, but for giant oil tankers, it creates a bottleneck. Inside the strait, ships follow two narrow lanes, one for entering and one for leaving. Despite its small size, this waterway carries an enormous amount of energy. Every day, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply travels through this passage. Most of this oil comes from countries in the Persian Gulf. For example, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates export huge amounts of oil to the rest of the world. But almost all of those ships must pass through the same narrow point, which means if something blocks the Strait of Hormuz, a large portion of global oil trade could suddenly stop. But this raises an important question. Who actually controls this critical passage? The answer mostly comes down to geography. The northern side of the Strait of Hormuz is controlled by Iran. Because of this position, Iran sits right next to one of the most important shipping routes in the world. This gives the country significant strategic influence. Over the years, Iran has built naval forces designed specifically for this region. Instead of only large warships, it uses smaller fast boats, missiles placed along the coast, and naval mines. These systems are designed to operate effectively in narrow waters. Iranian officials have sometimes said that if their country faces strong economic pressure or military threats, they might try to close the strait. Even small disruptions could be enough to create problems. For example, if shipping companies believe the area is dangerous, they might stop sending tankers through it. That would immediately affect countries that rely heavily on imported oil. Countries like India, China, and Japan. But there is another major power watching this situation very closely. Because the Strait of Hormuz is so important to global trade, the United States keeps a strong naval presence in the region. The goal is simple: keep the shipping route open. If the strait were blocked, the impact would spread far beyond the Middle East. Oil prices could increase rapidly. Fuel costs could rise, and many industries around the world would be affected. To prevent that from happening, international naval forces often patrol the area. Their presence helps reduce the risk of attacks on oil tankers and shipping routes. But tensions in the region sometimes increase due to political conflicts. When that happens, analysts and governments start asking the same question again. What would actually happen if the Strait of Hormuz were suddenly closed? If the Strait of Hormuz were blocked, global oil markets would react almost immediately. Countries in the Persian Gulf would struggle to export their energy supplies. For example, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Kuwait rely heavily on this route. Meanwhile, large importers such as China and India depend on these shipments. If the supply suddenly dropped, oil prices could rise quickly. That would affect transportation, electricity, and many industries. Some countries keep emergency oil reserves to deal with situations like this. But those reserves are meant only for short-term problems. If the strait remained closed for a long time, the global economy could face serious challenges. However, there is one reason experts believe a long-term closure is unlikely. Too many powerful countries rely on this waterway. The Strait of Hormuz might look small on a map, but connects the energy resources of the Persian Gulf to the entire world. Countries like India, China, and the United States all depend on the oil that passes through this route. Because of that, the strait has become one of the most closely watched locations on Earth. And as long as the world continues to rely on oil, this narrow passage will remain one of the most important and strategic waterways on the planet.